Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the AAA podcast. In this episode, we are joined by a very special guest. Coming off a national championship earlier this summer, I'm thrilled to welcome to the show LSU Baseball strength and conditioning coach, Chris Martin. Chris, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on.
So the first question we kind of like to start off with is a little bit of a fun question, just kind of get the conversation flowing. We're kind of surveying coaches on their caffeine intakes. Just walk us through, if you're a big caffeine guy, what it takes to get you through a day.
Yeah, so this is a fun one that I was ready for. I probably let's see. So I'm an energy drink guy. I've never been a big coffee guy. Like when I go in to order at Starbucks, like I'm intimidated. I don't know what to get, so I just tell them to give me a vanilla cold brew. That's all I know if I'm getting coffee. Um, so I usually in the morning will have some form of an energy drink. Sometimes rain. I usually buy them in bulk at Sam's Club. So if they have Reigns, I'll buy those. If not, I usually get like a pack of the White Monsters if they've got those. So one of those in the morning. So that's somewhere between 160 and 300, depending on which one it is. And then again, I like to stick with any form of like anhydrous caffeine. I think I feel it hits cleaner. I don't know. I don't love coffee the way it feels. I don't know. It's funky. So I have some pre-workout at the office, and so if I ever need like a little extra throughout the day, I'll just take like a scoop of C4, get myself another 150 milligrams, just dry scoop it real quick, and then that's usually about it. Um, I'm not like an afternoon caffeine drinker by any stretch of the imagination. I'm usually done by about noon or 1 o'clock. And so I probably keep it somewhere in the 300 to 500 milligrams per day range. Some would call it moderate, but yeah, it's nothing crazy, but it's definitely there.
Are any of the guys on the LSU team right now just absolute caffeine fiends?
Um, there's a couple that seem to always have a C4 with them. We had one or two last year that like always seem to have energy drinks. It's not too crazy, but I also try and do my part to like actually educate guys if they think they're using it for performance gains. Like just slowly sipping on an energy drink throughout the afternoon is not going to accomplish what they're trying to do. But yeah, baseball is an interesting sport when it comes to caffeine usage, anyways. Just because you got late games, and traditionally you've got relievers coming in at 9 p.m. and crushing a Red Bull right before they run out, and we could talk about if that's even beneficial with that much or little caffeine, and then the timing of it and how it's going to impact sleep. But yeah, the use of caffeine in sports, but specifically baseball, is an interesting one.
It seems like when I was in high school, it was all about Bang energy drinks, and then it turned into like Monsters, and now it's Reigns. Now, like I'll do
Yeah,
anything for an orange dreamsicle Reign. Like those are perfect money.
I've got a few in the fridge right now. When I was younger, I really liked the low carb Monster, the black can with the blue label. So I'll mix one of those in every now and then for the nostalgia of it.
That's the OG.
Yeah, I think White Monster's kind of like surpassed it though in terms of popularity. Like White Monster is the most known one now, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the big one that everyone kind of goes to.
At the point where like my Instagram reels, when I scroll down, are just a whole bunch of like energy drink memes. A lot of them are just like White Monsters. It's kind of funny. It's like that, and then like the lizard guy would be like, when you tell your athletes how many sets and reps to do, and they keep asking you, it's like the lizard guy hitting the
Oh
thing.
yeah. Yeah, I've got a guy that I used to work with at the Astros who sends me White Monster memes pretty frequently. So shout out Kevin if you're listening to this.
So again, congrats on winning the national championship. That's awesome. One of the questions I have kind of along with that is, what do you think sets LSU apart in terms of your training philosophy?
What I would say we try to do the basics at an extremely high level, and we try to have extremely good consistency. Um, like that's first and foremost before we dive into anything that might look sexy or any specialized or advanced methods. Like we've got to move well. We've got to develop a good general baseline of strength. We've got to be able to sprint fast and sprint often, and we reflect that in our training with our frequency um, and we've got to the sport of baseball. I think again this is something I've touched on a lot recently, but just having a decently well-rounded aerobic capacity, I think, is hugely important. So, like, those are some of our big rocks that we're trying to hit with our guys. Um, I think when I think about my training philosophy, I try to make the most correct decisions, and what I mean by that is I am trying to make we're making decisions all the time, whether it's writing a program, running through a warm up, writing a speed session, executing that session, having to make changes on the fly, uh, performance testing, like counter movement jump testing, how that might, or different, testing methods that we use, how that's going to influence our programming decisions or, changes that we're making to workload, whether it's on the field, in the gym. So everybody is kind of that's like the magic thing is how many right decisions can I make over a big enough sample size that's going to drive competitive advantage. And one of the interesting things in the strength and conditioning field is like you can do everything wrong and get a good outcome. And this is not just strength and conditioning but sport in general. You can do everything wrong and get a good outcome. You can do everything right and get a bad outcome, but you can't get wrapped up too much in the n=1. If you are thinking critically, you are assessing your decision making abilities. You are reviewing retroactively, whether that's after a session or after a season, like what went well, what didn't go well. Having some really high self awareness, having awareness of what's going on in the program, alignment of what the coaching staff's trying to do, and if you've got all that, at the end, we're just trying to make the most correct decisions because that's going to move the needle forward into what translates to the best product on the field and gets us the most wins.
So, kind of going along with like you can do everything, or you can have a result, and it might not be because you got everything in the process the correct way. So, like with your own training, like you just came off a national championship. Do you ever think like, oh, but if I change this, it might affect the outcome, or is that something you don't really think about?
It's something I'm always thinking about is like how do we do things better, right? So yeah, we just won a national championship, but I'll first and foremost say like you win a national championship or do anything great by having really good players, really talented players. So it starts with the recruiting process and getting the right people in the building and good players in the building. Um, but then when I sit and review, like there are things in my program that are going to look differently this year versus last year, whether that's I think part of them are how we're running warm up sessions, trying to explore some movement a little bit, get a little creative, have a little more fun with it. I think I'm kind of toying around with changing a little bit the structure of our starting pitchers weekly schedule in season. I've there's things that are staples in terms of we're going to develop a really good base, a foundational base through a GPP phase early. We're going to develop good movement qualities. We're going to again explore a lot of movements, try to just develop some general athleticism. I think that's missing in the sport of baseball at times nowadays with kids specializing super early. So yeah, I'm always thinking about how do we change things to optimize or end at the best outcomes. And even when it comes to like some of the data and the reporting, how do I streamline some of the reports that I'm how do I streamline some of the reports that I am popping out? How do I get the coaches to want to look at it as well as the athletes, but also make it really quick and digestible so I'm not just adding stuff to their plates? Like all that stuff's constantly running through my head on how can we continue to do things better, because now we've won a national championship. We're doing arguably the hardest thing in sports, and that's trying to go back to back.
Yeah, kind of talking about this change further, and like adjusting things year to year. Coming off of like a really successful season, and then also in your position coming into a program that's been really successful. How do you go about like advocating for the change that you want to see when someone can really easily be like, oh, but this is how we did it in the past and we got results? And then have you kind of seen any of that pushback from higher ups, whether it be coaches or the athletic department as a whole?
Yeah, I think if you are complacent, like complacency is really easy to sneak in and just say, "Oh, this is how we've done it, and it worked." Well, that's great. That doesn't mean it's going to continue to work. And the environment of sport is an ever changing landscape. You see that both on the field and in the job and the performance setting in which we do, but even things like NIL and things like that are shaping roster construction differently. The transfer portal, everything's different every year. Things are changing. So if you're staying the same, you're going to get left behind. I think one of the worst one of the worst answers a coach can ever give a player or another coach, why if asked why are we doing something, if your answer is ever some form of this is what we've always done, and this is just how we do it, that's no good. Like you should have a reason for why you're doing something, and sometimes it is you can be honest and say, hey, we're trying something new. I think this is what's going to happen. It may or may not work, and if it doesn't work, we can always go scrap it. But if you're complacent and you're willing to just kind of stay where you are, you're going to get left behind. I mean, I think in the tech world, like the company of Apple, where I was probably 6 or 7 when the iPod Nano came out, and Steve Jobs wasn't done there. Then he popped out the iPhone, and we were like, a phone with a touchscreen? What is going on? There's no buttons on this thing. This is crazy. And now we're on iPhone 16. Like they're continuing to iterate because you have to.
Yeah, I love that answer, especially because there's a quote that goes around a lot. I feel like it happens in baseball too, because baseball is just such like an old school sport of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's like kind of like what you're saying, like yeah, sure, but like we always have to improve, or there's always something that can get us to the next level going forward. Um, so one of the other questions I had was like, what made you want to go into collegiate strength and conditioning, especially after being in pro baseball?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's one I haven't heard in a little while because I got that question a lot when I first made the move to LSU, and I wasn't actively looking to leave professional baseball or leave the Astros organization. But last summer, when Coach Johnson called me up and we started to have the conversation, I told my boss at the Astros when I left, I'm like, well, one, there's only a handful of college jobs that I probably would have picked up the phone for to leave the Astros as the minor league coordinator, and LSU is probably the one. Like it's the most historic college baseball program there is. The more people I talked to about it, they were like, "Yeah, that SEC baseball is unreal environment. You're going to have access to good resources. It's like go give it a shot." And then for me personally, it was a bit of a leap of faith. Like it got me out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I was very comfortable with the Astros. I had been there for over 5 years. I kind of really understood how the organization worked inside and out. I've in different roles at different times, and we built out a lot of good systems and processes as a team that things really ran pretty smoothly in the strength and conditioning department. And so this was a challenge for me. Like, how can I handle going to a new environment? Now it's not like I'm working with a staff of 15-ish strength coaches where different ideas are getting floated around. Like, this is my program. It's myself. I've got one assistant. Um, that was a challenge. It was outside my comfort zone. And so I just took the leap of faith and went for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear it because I feel like people outside of baseball think that like pro ball is, the absolute highest um like pinnacle of where you can be as a coach, but it's like more and more it's becoming just like high level collegiate strength and conditioning, which is cool to see. Um and with that, I forgot my question. Oh, I remember. Okay. I feel like the Houston Astros have been always been known as like an organization that is ahead on player development and like using technology. What stuff from the Astros have you incorporated with LSU baseball on the strength and conditioning side?
Yeah, so when I got to the Astros in 2019, that first week was drinking from an absolute fire hose. And even looking when I left in 2024 to 2019, we were light years ahead in 24 than we were in 2019, but we had already laid the groundwork on integrating a lot of technology. How are we collaborating across departments to create the best outcomes for our players? And so, like, those are two big things. So, a lot of the technology pieces that we had with the Astros in the strength and conditioning world, we've got at LSU. So, I've got access to pretty much the full valve suite where you're using force plates weekly, speed gates, the smart speed gates throughout the year, Nord board, force frame, dynamo. So we're doing a lot of testing, both for checking for performance outcomes, but also potentially catching some flags on the health side of things. We're using the Catapult GPS system, which is another one that we use with the Astros, and being able to integrate some of the workload monitoring for position players with those has been really helpful. And then, like, above all that, it goes back to how do we make the most right decisions? Well, we have to be in an environment where we're not siloed as staff members. So I need to be very in tune with what's going on with our athletic trainers on a daily basis. I need to be in tune with what's going on with the pitching development side of things, the hitting development, the defensive development, understanding what the coaches want to see out of certain players so that I can facilitate that with their work in the gym. And everything that I'm doing from a strength and conditioning perspective is with the mindset that I need to make the best baseball players possible. A, because that's good for the Tigers, and B, because that's good for the individuals in their own careers. So that collaborative approach where there's no silos, everybody speaks the same language, everybody's on the same page, and then just using some of the technology resources were some of the big things that I brought with me.
Continuing on with like the technology and the force plate data, um, what's the specific like force plate data you look at, and have you seen any like correlations to on-field performance, even if it's like anecdotally or anything you're kind of looking into?
Yeah, so again, I've seen thousands of force plate trials at this point. With hitters, we'll start there. Very black and white. You get bigger, you get stronger, you're going to hit the ball harder. Very strong, very consistent correlation between concentric impulse, body weight, and exit velocity. So that's very, very cut and dry. Now, we can't get players bigger and stronger indefinitely because they still have to play defense and have value there. They have to run the bases and have value there. And that's where conversations with the coaching staff become really important. Like, how much are we valuing a certain player's ability to run versus their offensive output? And it's kind of like this sliding scale almost to a certain extent of like, how much do they need to move the needle in terms of with the bat versus where they're at running wise or defensively. And so because of that, I'll also look at a relative power is a pretty catch-all metric. So I like to look at a mean relative power. You can do peak. They're going to correlate pretty well, but I think mean kind of gives you a good idea of overall accelerative ability of the player. So I'll look at impulse, relative power. I like to look at an RSI mod because then that kind of teases out why we're seeing certain changes. Is it a change in jump strategy? Is it purely a change in output? Are we sacrificing time for output, and in what ways? So like those are like my three big catch-all metrics would be impulse, relative power, RSI mod. For position players, you can then go break down some of the secondary or more peripheral metrics. Maybe it's an eccentric duration or a contraction time. And those might be relevant with the RSI mod metric, but they also are relevant because sport is played in a time constrained environment. You don't have unlimited time to produce output in most sports. So that's a piece, but it could also be a readiness, readiness monitoring or fatigue monitoring with some of the time-based stuff. So you can always go and dig deeper into some of those secondary metrics like that. For pitchers, it's a little bit more gray area. I've seen some data sets that suggest that impulse and body weight, like mass equals gas, is kind of true. I've seen data sets where that's not so true, and impulse at 100 milliseconds is more of a correlator to fastball velocity versus just pure output and body weight. So I think there's more gray area with pitchers. I think the next frontier for that with me, that's something I've been playing around with for a while, is trying to help match up a guy's delivery with his force plate or force production characteristics. So if I've got a guy who's more force dominant, takes a lot of time, but maybe produces a high amount of force or output or jump height, but it's slower, well, that maybe should be reflected in his delivery with like a deeper, more powerful, pronounced hinge or sit and more time into the ground to produce force and produce momentum. You could do the flip side with somebody who's springier, more elastic, relies on some of those tendinous and elastic qualities to produce force. And if that's a guy who's trying to force a really big, deep sit on the mound, he might not be utilizing his body or his delivery in a way that's conducive for him to produce force or to get moving fast. So that's kind of like the next piece to examine is like, how accurate can we get with that?
Do you have like your own kind of database where you keep all this data where it's like, here's the average 95 mile per hour arm. This is how much their impulse is at 100 milliseconds, or is it more of just like you seeing the data after so many trials that you kind of know where like people should be?
So I do have a database with all of our stuff at LSU. I'm no sports scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I can work my way around Excel pretty well without any like formal coding syntax. I understand some programming, computer programming principles, but I don't know any of the languages like R or Python, and that could be something to get better at in the future. But with my data set, like I know generally what some of these averages are going to look like based on position or based on, I know some of the correlations that hold pretty strongly. Now building out profiles on what is the average 95 mile an hour arm, that might be something else to look into. It's something I haven't done because I think, again, when we talk about pitchers, it's so individual. Like you've got guys that are 6'8", 250 and throw 97, and you've got guys that are 6'2", a buck 80 and throw 97. Those are very different archetypes. And so at the end of the day, it's like individually, what do those guys need to do to throw harder? And it's going to be a different answer. So I don't know that I like want to say like, hey, this is what the average is. Let's try and converge on that. Like let's build on what you do well or try to optimize what you do well and then bring up your weaknesses so they're no longer limiting your ability to throw hard.
Gotcha.
As we kind of talk about, like, I don't know, building and developing this athletic profile, I think there's a lot of people that would argue that you're working with such skilled athletes that like building up these general principles aren't really going to affect them that much. And then two, with like the way college sports are, you might be getting a player for only, I don't know, a couple months out of the year now, and you don't have a lot of time to spend with them. What would you kind of say to that argument that it's like not really worth spending time to build up these general adaptations when you get such a short amount of time with them?
Yeah, so for the skill piece, I'm not going to argue against that. Like having a high skill in the sport is absolutely going to trump physical development. That being said, they don't have to be independent of one another. So you can be very skilled and spend a lot of time practicing the skill. And some guys are naturally more skilled than others, and the physical development side can get a little bit more of what's the word I'm looking for here? I hope you can edit this out. The physical development side gets more of a priority is probably a good word, versus some guys are very physically developed and the skill side is lacking, and that needs to take a bigger piece of their training economy. And maybe you have a guy that's more equal on both. So I don't discount the importance of practicing skill. I think it's our job as strength and conditioning coaches to understand that skill is paramount, and we are here to build the capacity, the engine, the hardware to better express the skill on the field. And a lot of times, in my opinion, strength and conditioning is far, far more general than specific in nature than people want to give it credit for. So let's go into an example here and like use the Bondarchuk pyramid. So you got your competitive exercises, your specific preparatory exercises right below that. So competitive exercise for a pitcher, for example, would be pitching in a game. That's your competitive exercise. Your SPE exercises are going to be like throwing bullpens, throwing program, constraint drills, throwing plyo balls, anything that's actually throwing an implement that is very similar to the way that you're going to throw it in sport. So a lot of people want to put rotational med ball throws into a program because they're trying to work on sequencing, or they think, it's specific because I'm throwing it, but throwing a med ball is not like throwing a baseball. So that's more of a specific development exercise. So if we have this spectrum of, generality to specificity, strength and conditioning falls way more on the generality side than people want to give it credit for, because they want to think that they're making an impact on the skill side of things. And sometimes you are. Sometimes we can give a guy, maybe we program for in a way that's going to open up movement options or movement solutions for him so he can access new positions, new ranges of motion to utilizing the skill. Great. Maybe it's a motor patterning drill that we're going to implement in a warm-up or maybe part of their training. Great. But that's about where it ends. Like unless you're writing both the throwing and the strength and conditioning, and then you can maybe start to blend them a little bit more. But strength and conditioning is way more general than specific in nature. Yes, skill work is important. Yes, we need to practice and we need to allocate a good amount of our training time to that. It depends on the individual, how much training time gets put to physical development, how much gets put to skill development. But those two, it's our job to build the hardware and the engine that can go express the skill. That's how I would, ultimately answer that.
So with that being said, do you use med balls? Like, do you still do med ball throws and stuff like that?
I do. But I still believe that they are a stimulus to generate high rotational velocities or high rotational power outputs, but they are not specific to throwing a baseball. I want to make that very, very clear. Or swinging a bat. They are different movements, and the kinematics of them are very different. And some people will go as far as putting a guy up on a mound and throwing a med ball. Okay, maybe that's slightly more specific in terms of, okay, now I'm at least feeling the slope, and maybe, I'm trying to apply force into the ground in a way that feels more like pitching. But again, the kinematics, once the lower half piece is done, like the whole upper half, torso, arm, all that is completely different. So it's not specific to throwing a baseball. I still do them, but I do them with a general adaptation in mind, not a specific one. You're not throwing med balls to get better at pitching or sequencing or things. And again, they can maybe be used for some patterning or some field things, implemented into a throwing session could be good. Hey, we're trying to get you to feel this part of the delivery. Maybe it's hip shoulder separation. So I'm going to give you the heavy implement of a med ball, and we'll do a throw, and maybe we'll pause at foot strike, or maybe we'll do the whole thing. But my priority there is to really pattern the drill and feel the movement that I want to feel, but still not specific to throwing.
That's one thing that really clicked for me when I started learning about med ball throws is, one, it's not as specific as we think it is, and two, the kinematic sequence is so much different. Like, holding a med ball causes so much co-contraction, and it just does not allow you to relax, which is kind of what you need to rotate and get these parts to accelerate and decelerate. Is you need some sense of relaxation. It needs to happen very violently and fast. And when you're holding a 8-pound med ball, it's really hard to relax because your body's trying not to get tugged by an 8-pound med ball. So yeah, that's something that clicked for me. But
Yeah.
I think it's good because you're kind of carrying. I think it's good when someone can break down an argument for both sides, why you would use med balls, but then also why it's not the end all be all for rotational athletes. So
yeah, and again, they're just a tool, and they are, they have their place. And when I do med ball throws, our guys don't throw 8-pound med balls. It's 6 maybe on a scoop toss variation, but if it's a shot variation, it's going to be a 2 or a 4-pound. Like I am trying to rotate very fast and very violently because I'm just building up again the general rotational velocity or rotational power. That's all I'm trying to do. And I also don't spend a ton of time trying to like get really, really, really detailed on the coaching of it because the kinematics are so different, right? So if it doesn't look perfect, but it looks serviceable, I might give one external cue and that's it. If it's really, really messy and really bad, like we might stop and try and break it down and just be athletic with it. But I don't coach, like I'm not trying to coach mechanics when I coach a med ball because it's just, I just want them to go fast and go hard and throw the absolute piss out of the ball.
Right.
A lot of what we've been talking about is like increasing the performance of athletes, but I am a little bit curious. Are your thoughts on college athletes being such like an investment from schools and then also from major league organizations wanting to draft a player after a season? Have you felt a shift in maybe a desire less for like performance, edging out performance from an athlete, and more just keeping them healthy and ready for the MLB draft at the end of the season? Have you felt any like pressure as far as people not wanting you to do stuff because they're worried athletes are going to get injured or push too hard?
That's a good question. Have I felt pressure to kind of like back off? Not necessarily. I think you can we can put up another spectrum example here. So we can live on the side of max health, and we can live on the side of max performance, right? And so max health is don't get out of bed. You will not get hurt if you don't get out of bed, but you'll also never accomplish anything. So we can't live here. Max performance is like world class powerlifting, or doing something really, you flip on Instagram reels and seeing some guy do some wild parkour stunt where he's jumping from roof to roof, like really cool human, physical feat, but probably comes with a higher degree of risk. So we've got to live somewhere in this spectrum. I think in the professional setting, development was really our main priority. It wasn't wins and losses. So we were comfortable maybe accepting a little bit more risk in terms of how hard we were going to push guys in season, knowing that the end goal was create the best big league player possible. And if we have to sacrifice a little bit right now, that's fine. I think I probably shift a little bit more conservatively in the college setting where winning is our biggest priority. Like our best guys have to be ready to play 4 to 5 games a week and maybe more in the postseason, and maybe multiple times a day in the postseason if things get funky. So I probably get a little bit more conservative where I prioritize readiness a little bit more than physical development, especially in season. But I don't think I've felt pressure to, back off on the training, because I do also believe like the best way to keep somebody healthy is, one, you can't eliminate the demands of the sport or the exposures that they're going to get in their sport. So I need to build a resilient and robust enough athlete to handle all of those demands, which usually means, it doesn't necessarily mean do more, but it definitely doesn't mean do less. It means do the right amount at the right time. That's what workload management is, by the way. It's do the right amount at the right time. It's not do more, it's do less. It might be both simultaneously with different athletes in the gym on one given day. But I think we have to understand like what the demands are. How do I build somebody who's resilient enough to handle those, and not only handle those, but succeed and have a good performance while doing so?
I think that's a good answer. And I liked what you said about like the on one end of the spectrum is just like not getting out of bed to not get injured. I know Anthony talks about this a little bit on his Instagram and stuff, is like sport has inherent risk of playing the sport. Like you might get injured playing the sport. We need to like be a little bit proactive in creating adaptations that allow you to play that sport without getting injured. And of course we can't just prevent all injuries, but there is also some risk, I guess, we have to take on that training aspect of preparing the body to play sport. We can't just do nothing because that's setting us up for failure.
100%. And that's like the argument of like, well, we don't want to sprint because we don't want to pull our hamstrings. Okay, that's the best way to pull your hamstrings when it actually matters, right? So like that makes no sense when you think about it physiologically. And so yeah, it's everything we do is a cost benefit analysis, and if the expected return is greater than the expected cost, it's a behavior that we should engage in. That's just behavioral economics 101, and that's all we're doing. And the difficult piece with that is that like I can't run an Excel sheet that says if I do this, I'm going to lower my injury risk by this much. So it's very theoretical, and it's very abstract at times in nature, but it's a theoretical cost benefit analysis that I'm always running, and that's part of trying to make better decisions more often is like how can I calculate that correctly, even though like there's no actual math to be done.
Kind of going along with like strategies to increase performance. What was, I guess, at what point in the season, and maybe this didn't happen during the season, but were you like, all right, we got to start thinking of like how we're going to get these guys prepared and to train at their highest level during the postseason? Is that something that happens during the preseason and everything leading up to that, or is that more like a decision that happens towards the end of the regular season?
That's part of kind of the annual plan. I don't sit and write an annual plan in my head just because so many things go wrong at different times. Maybe a guy gets sick and he's out for 2 weeks, or maybe he gets hurt, and that's going to throw a wrench in the entire plan. I have a general roadmap in my head of where I want to go, and basically what that is from the beginning of the off season through probably winter break into January is like we're going to train very hard to develop adaptations, robust, resilient athletes that are prepared to play the sport and play well. Then as we get into more of that preseason phase, some of the volume and the intensity, not the intensity, some of the volume comes down. Maybe some of again, I'm losing my word here, but some of the focus of our programming changes. So maybe we're not lifting loads that are going to create peripheral soreness, or we're not going to elicit as much central nervous system fatigue. And then as we get into the season, I almost used a bit of like a conjugate method, like a modified conjugate method with like a max effort day and dynamic day. It wasn't a true max effort day by any stretch of the imagination, but we had a day where we prioritized strength in the weight room and continuing to kind of maintain some of those adaptations that we had built throughout the off season, and then a day that was more rate of force development, speed focused, moving really fast, getting prepped for the weekend. And so that kind of carried us through the season. And then as we get into the postseason, so pretty much starting right around SEC tournament regionals, then I really even back it off even more in that strength day. The volume comes down a little bit. We still do it, but the load gets a little bit lower at that point. I think you're trying to let all of the training that you've done for that year kind of carry you through the postseason and really hit like a peaking phase. It's a sport with a long postseason, so we're not peaking for one particular event like you might in track or field. But I want to peak where I know I'm not causing a ton of soreness. I am causing, I'm trying to promote really high readiness. And that's the point where I'm also really flexible. Like if a guy's super beat up and we have a plan for that day, like we might flip it and just whiteboard something and go through a 20-minute, quick 20-minute session that look nothing like the original plan. But if that's what's going to get him to perform the best at that time of the year, then we're going to do that every single time. And that's kind of how it works. So put in a ton of work on the front end and in the off season so that we can kind of carry ourselves through the regular season without going backwards, and then try and peak that last month or so.
Gotcha. And with that, like, are you specifically in season bucketing players, like by position group or by, I know some people group them by like strength, or if some guys are just in a power group, like deep bucket guys like that, or is everyone typically running the same program?
In season, everyone's pretty similar because we have again one strength focus day, one rate of force development, speed, power, whatever you want to call it, focus day. Off season is where I'll bucket guys a little bit more, where some guys have a higher training age, and maybe we get into again some of those more advanced methods, where other guys just need some good consistent work and to build a good level of strength and movement capacity. And so off season guys will get bucketed. As we get into in season, we may have some exercise selection considerations for different guys here and there, or some volume consideration for regular players versus guys who don't play as much, who are so like individually we may make a few changes, but I'm not making like group bucket systems in season.
Gotcha. Here's another like question following up with that is, do you have specific like arm care that you prescribe for your throwers or just for like your athletes in general, or do you kind of just let the general strength training take over for preparing them for throwing?
So our athletic training staff handles a lot of the arm care for the pitchers specifically. They've got 3 different programs that they're going to do throughout the week, kind of tailored around their throwing schedule, and they get a really high level of compliance, and they do a really, really good job with that. I will supplement with some, general basic arm care stuff, maybe an exercise or 2 per session, just to supplement that a little bit. And outside of that, I kind of let the rest of the training holistically take care of what we know as arm care. But when you come to arm care specific stuff, our training staff has some different programs set up for the guys based on, did you throw yesterday? Is it a bullpen day? Is it a recovery day? Something like that. But they are driving most of the arm care programming.
As you like build out plans for maybe injured guys as well with that athletic training staff, is that something you guys are all like constantly working on together, or is there a point at which it kind of flips one team to the other?
So I think everybody needs to be on, when it comes to return to play, everyone should be on the same page at all times. I think early in a well-run return to play team, early on, the medical staff takes the lead. Strength and conditioning is more of a secondary role. That's where whatever the injury is, we're returning to form, returning to function, getting out some of the acute pain, inflammation, things like that. At some point, you're going to hit this transition phase where they start to do more and more work with the strength and conditioning coach. You might have a system where there's like a hard handoff and it's like, okay, you're doing it now. That's not really how we do it. It kind of, there's this gradual, middle ground. And so if a guy is returning into the weight room to train that injured body part, like I'm going to write a program and then we're going to sit down and go through it. And if they look at it and they go, okay, this is great, we go run it. They might be down there to observe some of that training too. But we try to make sure that A, they're not doing anything in the training that's contraindicated. B, that we're not like doubling up on exercises that they might be doing on the rehab side of things. But that back half of the return to play or return to performance, as some people call it, should really be strength and conditioning led and then assisted by the medical staff. And I think that can be a sticking point in organizations at times, because the medical staff, at the end of the day, a lot of places the policy is medical has the overarching final word on what happens with the player. And I get that, and I fully understand that. They're the ones signing off when a player returns. They're the ones working under a license. We are not. So I get that. But at times I feel like medical staff members are not trained in the performance side of things like a strength and conditioning or performance coach is. And therefore, sometimes those processes can really go awry, and you've got to be kind of careful with that. So here at LSU, we are on the same page at all times. I really try to I write a lot of the return to performance stuff. So if it's a running progression, again, I'm writing the program. We're sitting down, going through it together, and then any changes that need to be made on the fly are kind of, if they're suggested by one party, like it's going to be okayed by it's going to be run through the other party, and we're going to sit down and discuss that again. So no decisions really happen here in a vacuum. In the early stages, say a guy injures a hamstring and it's a pretty gnarly one, and he just cannot do any sort of lower body work on that side. That's fine. I can still train him in the gym, and we can do an upper body only session, or maybe train the unaffected leg. So there's always ways that I'm involved, even in the early stages, if it's not dealing with that exact injury. But I'm still very secondary in nature in terms of where we're at in that return to play progression.
Yeah, I've been around I've been around places where it's like the medical staff starts the on ramp back to, for example, like sprinting. Like we had someone who strained their hamstring. They're probably like close to a 22-mile-per-hour runner, so they're like fast. One of our infielders, and they're like progressively getting him back to sprinting. But like he said that he got cleared after just doing 50% jogs on the treadmill, and it's like, did we forget about how like potent the dose of sprinting is, and how it's like 100% sprint is nowhere close to 50%.
No, and again, so I think it's good to build out frameworks as a team of like how are we going to objectify progress and progress a guy through a return to play setting. Um, it's also it depends on what the priority of the organization is. And I'll use an example. We had a guy. He was our only soft tissue, lower body soft tissue injury this year. Strained a quad on a Tuesday, I think, and just by the nature of college athletics, like his bat was pretty valuable. And so while he was not able in any capacity to play defense or really run outside of a jog, he had a pinch hit single on Friday, 3 days later. And so he basically did the Kirk Gibson where he short hopped the wall, jogged to first base, could not go for a double, knew he couldn't go for a double, and then we pitch ran for him. But like the bat was valuable in that spot, and so he came up to hit and hit. And so although he was playing, he had very clear limitations on what he could or couldn't do. Because there's bigger rosters and bigger active rosters in the collegiate setting versus like say the professional setting where you've got 12 or 13 position players available. And if you're going to have a guy who can't play or run the bases or play defense, he's going to go on the IL and they're going to rehab that thing until he's 100% ready to return. So I think the priorities of the organization, time of year, in terms of like, are we trying to push this guy back for the postseason and maybe we expedite some of the processes? Like, okay, it's a cost benefit analysis, right? Like we know that we are assuming more risk by making that decision, but the benefit of having that player available for the postseason might outweigh that in the theoretical, framework that we're working on. So, I think there's a ton that goes into good return to play, and you can find some of those nightmare scenarios everywhere. But being on the same page, understanding your roles at different points in the process, depending on how your staff has laid it out, and building out frameworks for how do we actually going to return a guy are hugely important, so that you don't end up in that nightmare scenario where the medical staff and the strength and conditioning staff don't talk and they don't like each other, and everyone's trying to undermine everybody. Like that gets nasty quick, and it can really spiral. And the person ultimately that receives the short end of the stick with that becomes the athlete.
Yeah, I think those are the things that it's even me like before getting into the profession is like you don't really think about them. Like some people just look at the strength coach and they're like, oh, he's the guy who yells at people to lift weight up. But then there's all these intricacies and behind the scenes of what goes into keeping players at their peak performance and going through these theoretical scenarios. And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of working in an environment that isn't siloed. Um, I go, I this is a bit of a tangent, but like talking about return to throw is something I'm super passionate about, and something that we did a ton of work with when I was in the rehab strength and conditioning role with the Astros, and I spent probably 2+ years like fully diving into return to throw. What makes it good? What makes it bad? How can we do it better? And coming out of that, when we rolled out a completely new return to throw program for Tommy John that was completely objectified, and we basically took our original, 20 throws at 60 feet and worked back from there. We took that basically threw it in a paper shredder. People were very uncomfortable hearing a strength coach present that information. And so I think, it's part of the nature of what people think a performance strength coach does or a performance coach. But I think the best ones are able to understand return to play frameworks and principles. They're able to understand skill acquisition principles. They are very in tune with what's going on in their specific sport. And so like I'll still say to this day, like I probably can write a better return to throw program than 99% of people in the baseball world, maybe more. And some might view that as arrogance, but I did the work and understand it at a high enough level that I don't care that I'm a strength coach. I can write a damn good return to throw program. And so people are not always okay with that. But I think the landscape is shifting, and I think the best strength coaches, and again, this is a bit of a tangent, I think the best strength coaches blur those lines between skill, what happens on the S&C side, and even some of the medical side. Like you've got to be able to do it all, speak it all, to do it at the highest level.
I think that's a really interesting thought, and something that we've actually talked to our last several guests about is kind of those like blurry lines in between professions. I kind of had a very open-ended question about this. It was mainly about like misconceptions about what people have of being a coach at an SEC school. But additionally on that, are there any like roles that you think you fill that, and you think strength coaches should fill that maybe aren't thought about when people think of a sports performance coach or a strength coach?
Nothing that like jumps out. I wear a lot of hats here just by the nature of it. Like in pro ball, there's 100+ people, depending on the org, on the baseball ops or baseball development side of things. So like tons of people looking at problems from different angles. Here, there's a much smaller staff size at any college program. So I'm doing the sports science side of things. I'm at practice and I'm watching and I'm observing guys and seeing what I view as what are their strengths and weaknesses. And then I'm talking to the baseball coaches about it to understand what they're seeing too, because they're obviously the ones that are a little bit more trained at that. Yeah, I've played baseball. Baseball is what I've coached my entire life pretty much. So I'm very much a baseball guy, and I understand the sport at a very high level for a strength and conditioning coach. But I can always learn a ton from what those guys are seeing. Like their coaching eye for skill work should be better than my coaching eye is. And it usually is. But there are sometimes where maybe I'll see something. Maybe it's a guy throwing a bullpen, and because of my interactions and watching that guy train and knowing how his body produces force or how his body moves or what his predispositions are, I can make a suggestion. Hey, I think you might want to try this with that player. And so I think you've got to be able to wear a lot of different hats as a strength and conditioning coach. Again, I think you've got to dip your toes into the medical world. I think you've got to understand what's going on, starting at the physicians and the surgeons through the athletic training and physical therapists. You've got to dip your toes really heavily into the sport in which you're coaching if you want to get the best results. Some people are, in an environment where they have 10 teams and they don't ever get to step outside of the gym. So that's a different, scenario where you're doing the best with what you've got in terms of the situation and the time allocations and all that. But you've got to dip yourself into some of the skill acquisition side specific to your sport, and you've got to dip yourself into some of the sports science and data sides of things so that you can make better decisions. And then nutrition is another one that goes in there. I think mental health can fall into that at times too. Like there's just so many different hats you've got to wear, and there's nobody who has more touch points outside of the athletic training staff than a strength and conditioning coach will with the athletes. Like I spend more time with them than the coaches do. So I really need to understand everything that's going on, whether it's personal life. I don't need to know everything, but I need to know if something is affecting what we're trying to accomplish. I need to know what's going on in the sport, what the coaches think of them, what the player thinks of themselves, what they're good at, what they're not good at. What's our objective in terms of what we're trying to get better at currently. So there's a ton that goes on when it comes to like maximizing your role as this performance coach.
I agree that that's a big piece. I think as people who kind of are supposed to manage or help manage the stress of the athletes, it's important to kind of be in tune with what's going on in their life, even outside of just the weight room, so we can effectively manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you got to put on a sales hat at times when you talk about managing stress, because sometimes you have to convince the athlete or coaching staff or different stakeholders that you need to add stress to the athlete or to pull stress away. And sometimes that comes in the form of like, hey, this guy just needs like a day off. He's crushed. His injury risk is up. His performance is down. He's tired. A day off will do him wonders. But can you actually sell that to a coach who wants to run him out there and start him that day? So sales would be another one that I think you got to understand.
I kind of just have like another open-ended question. I guess it's kind of like more of a fun question, but what is like one philosophy or like training philosophy that you have that you think 99% of others would disagree with?
So it's not 99%, but it's something I've touched a lot. I think baseball players have historically really horribly developed aerobic systems and have really poor aerobic capacity, and they stand to gain a lot from doing that kind of work. People who don't agree with me on that are going to say that we are basically detraining speed qualities when we do some of the aerobic capacity and volume work, and that we're training the wrong muscle fibers, and that it's not specific to the demands of the sport. My rebuttal to all of that would be that I'm not trying to build a marathon runner, but I'm trying to collect some low-hanging fruit with a low to moderate, depending on time of year, volume of aerobic work. That at that volume, you're not going to see a true interference effect if the rest of your programming is up to par. So, yeah, if I'm not sprinting and I'm not lifting heavy and I'm only doing aerobic work, yeah, I'll probably get slower. And yeah, I probably won't make any sort of strength or speed gains. But when you've got this vertically integrated model where aerobic is just part of the training allocation, it's not so much that you're going to get an interference effect. So I think in the sport of baseball specifically, that gets missed a lot. And I think pitchers, like, it's obvious to me, like recovery pitch to pitch, a more robust aerobic system is going to allow you to work at a lower relative intensity as that system gets more robust, and you eventually boost your VO2 max a little bit or boost your lactate threshold, which can happen with enough volume of low intensity work. But it's also going to help replenish your PCR stores quicker between bouts or between pitches. Baseball plays a unique schedule. It's a denser schedule than pretty much any other American sport. So you're playing 4 to 6, maybe 7 times a week. And there's so many competitions that you have to constantly recover from, a lot of travel stress, a lot of sleep disruptions because of the game environments, and a lot of weather delays that disrupt sleep. So having a robust aerobic system is going to help you recover a little bit better. So I think pitchers have to actually allocate some of their training time towards that. Like, stop shagging BP and do aerobic work. Like, it's a better use of your time, I promise you. Unless you're doing like a true power shag, but then we're not even accomplishing, like, then it becomes like interval work where we're just high heart rate, which sure might be better than nothing, but it's not like a true zone 2. But if you're just standing out there in the outfield and you're just like watching a ball bounce in front of you and going to pick it up every 3 minutes, and that's all you're doing for 45 minutes, you just wasted time. And if you're a coach that is telling pitchers they have to shag as opposed to doing work that's actually going to benefit them, you're an asshole. On the position player side of things, depending on your training or depending on your practice, I think a lot of practices have a dense enough flow to them, or enough movement and time on feet that you kind of get that stimulus through the practice itself. But if not, you can always supplement it in training, I think. But like actually practicing, like if you go out and take ground balls for 45 minutes with 1 or 2 short breaks, like your heart rate's going to be relatively elevated that entire session, and you're going to be breathing and you're going to be sweating, and that's a pretty good stimulus right there. But pitchers don't get that in their training, so you've got to allocate some of your time towards it.
But we need people to shag baseballs.
It's one of the stupidest things. Well, we want pitchers out there to shag BP. But fuck that. So excuse my language, but like that's just a waste of time, and that you're just doing it to feed some weird ego thing or some like weird traditional thing that you're not trying to break. Like that's a case of like we're making the wrong decision, and if you do it enough wrong decisions leads to lower competitive advantage versus the competition. So I guess I should be telling our opponents that everybody should be shagging.
It's really interesting how, like, I guess from my point of view, at least as a young coach and a baseball player, how fast that whole debate kind of swung from like people went from prescribing conditioning at a pretty high level to just like a lot of people were just like no conditioning ever. And it's very interesting how that as that pendulum has swung and it swung so aggressively to one side. Where like, obviously I can understand the arguments from the very little to no conditioning side, but at the same time, it's probably beneficial to any sport to have some sort of aerobic capacity. Like, even if you're not touching on that a lot in the sport, it's probably going to do you a benefit to have a little bit of exposure to that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, in baseball, when we think about the position players, one of like the sneaky workloads that kind of gets overlooked is just time on feet. Like they're just standing a lot. And so like there's value in going out and having dense practices. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And being on your feet a lot is just like, again, the right amount at the right time.
So kind of two things. The first thing, to play devil's advocate, like if there's a pitch every 15 seconds, and then why not do like repeated sprint work? Why do like more general aerobic stuff?
Because you should be getting that stimulus from pitching.
Right. Okay.
Like, how do I at the beginning of a season? Do you see anybody throw a complete game in week one in Major League Baseball or anything? No, because they're not built up for it. They're thinking in terms of the arm, but in terms of a conditioning stimulus. If I asked, our guys come in and they go through and they build up their pitch counts, and most guys are ready for like 5 innings, 75 pitches roughly on opening day. So if I ask them to throw 9 innings, they're going to be cooked by it. Well, of course, because they don't have that conditioning stimulus, but the act of actually competing in the sport and building up that pitch count over time prepares you to handle it, not just from an arm health standpoint, but from a physical output standpoint too, and how long can I maintain whatever my performance or velocity levels are. So you should be getting it through your sport. And I'm also not saying that you only do aerobic capacity work, but I feel like that is because our guys will do some repeat sprint training. They will do some tempo runs as well. Like it's not only aerobic work, but aerobic work is missed too much, and it's the foundational. Same way you want to build a good general baseline of strength for most athletes in the weight room. It's the same concept. You wouldn't take a kid who's super weak and just be like, all right, all we're going to do is sprint and we're going to do depth drops from a 36-inch box. Like, sure, like that could help him a little bit, but at some point you also are going to need some sort of strength development as well, or some hypertrophy development. It's the same concept. We're missing the foundation.
Right. There has to be some sort of capacity. And like to go along with kind of what you and Rowan were saying, where it's like it's probably good for any athlete. It's also just good to be like to have a good aerobic base, to just be a living human being, like to be a person, like acknowledging that we are like people before athletes, and having some sort of aerobic base is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. But in terms of competing at the highest level, I think there's just so much. It's low hanging fruit. And again, I say like I think I don't know where I saw it recently. Like baseball's not a marathon, but a season is. So I don't need you to be able to run a marathon, but I need you to be able to handle a season. 70 games in 4 months is a lot. And then when we talk about professional baseball, we're talking about between the middle of March when minor league spring training games end and the end of August, September, depending on which level you're at, you're over the course of six and a half months completing 150 plus games, or at the big league level, 162 plus spring training plus maybe a postseason. That's a lot of competition that you've got to be able to compete, recover, and so like that base is important.
Just to follow along with like the aerobic training, do you still do that in season? And if you do, are you doing more like modalities that require running, or kind of just like offloading non-impact stuff like riding the bike or elliptical?
So our pitchers will continue to do one capacity session a week, one tempo running session per week. I give them autonomy to choose the modality for the capacity session, and 95+% are going to pick an off feet or low impact method. So it might be an incline walk on the treadmill, a reverse incline walk. It might be the elliptical. It might be the bike, but it's going to be low impact. We're not having guys go out and run poles for 45 minutes in season, but that's something that some of them will do in the off season. But I kind of give them the autonomy to pick that. And most are going to naturally gravitate towards the off feet stuff, which is fine for me.
My next question is kind of a shift in topics. So, Anthony, if you have any more on this wavelength, go ahead and ask them.
Now go for it.
So once again, shifting gears here a little bit. I'm curious from like someone who's in a really cool position, for like an aspiring young strength coach, similar to myself, or someone who's even just getting into the field, and they want to get themselves into roles with the most valuable experience, and then also be able to market themselves at the highest value. Where are avenues you recommend going, and like how can we begin to navigate these career options to better set ourselves up in the future?
Yeah, I think you've got to have a general idea of what you want to do with your career. I hate the question that's like the interview question, like, oh, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because if you would have asked me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have answered anything close to the head strength coach for LSU baseball. I would have been like, I would probably be working towards a role as a strength coach with the major league team with Houston. That probably would have been my answer. So now my answer is like, I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other every single day, and doors and avenues are going to open themselves that I might not even know exist right now. But you have to be generally trying to advance yourself, move forward. So I'll start with that. And that can kind of tailor where you go in terms of what role you accept. And if that's along the path that you want to go, it can tailor kind of some of the continuing education. I think like do research on people that have positions that you want to get to and understand what their background was and what their track record looked like, and see if there, what commonalities there are, because that'll help kind of shape some of your decisions. I think going to events where you can network, conferences, things like that, where you can get into the room and sit and talk to these people and get their guidance. I think if you can find the right person to be a mentor, and not find a mentor just to say you have one, but like find somebody who's done what you want to do. And if you can, and don't just reach out and say, hey, I want you to be my mentor, like try to provide some value for them and form an authentic relationship that maybe grows from there. I think that can be an avenue. But those would generally be some suggestions. I think, on a specific case by case basis could maybe go into like a little bit more depth on that, but that's just like a very broad career development, career trajectory answer.
Obviously, a lot of like intro positions aren't very well paid, and a lot of the times, no matter where you go, you're gonna have to kind of fight through a time period where you're probably pretty broke and not making any money. You talked at the beginning of the episode of like taking a leap of faith into your current position. Is that something you'd also recommend for young strength coaches, is taking that leap of faith and going to a position where maybe they might kind of struggle financially for a couple of years to set themselves up better in the future?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, my first position with the Astros, it was a paid internship. Before that, I did an unpaid internship at Cressy Sports Performance in Massachusetts. It was unpaid for the summer, so I had to figure out. I split a bedroom with one of the other guys that was interning. We were renting a room in addition to somebody's house, and we were splitting that room. I had a queen mattress in there, and he slept on a queen-sized air mattress all summer. And we split that room, and we paid $400 each a month in rent, and didn't make a dime out of it. But that internship experience is literally what led to the Astros. A guy with the Astros, Bill Furcus, was the director of sports med and performance at the time. Saw that on my LinkedIn profile and reached out because of it. So that door with the Astros opened because I did that at Cressy, and I went out there and had a great summer doing it. And then when I started with the Astros, it was a paid internship position. I made $30,000 prorated with zero benefits. Living in West Palm Beach, Florida, for those who aren't familiar, it's not cheap. Looking back, I'm not. I look back and I go, I don't even really know how I made ends meet there. I didn't have a car payment. My car was paid off, so I had that going for me at least. But like rent wasn't cheap, food wasn't cheap, but I made it work. I don't know that I was shoveling money away into a savings account or anything. But then that led to me getting hired on full time. And then when I got promoted from a minor league strength and conditioning coach into the rehab strength and conditioning role, it was because we had a new head of S&C. They had opened that position. It had never crossed my mind that like I would go for it. He had to go back to Virginia because he was brand new. He was moving his wife and his dog down. I was at the complex, and he basically said, "I need you to run the rehab for the next week or so." I said, "Okay, fine, whatever. I'm just doing what I'm told." Like 3 days into that, I was like, "Oh, I can do this. I can do this rehab job." So I called him up and I was like, "Hey, can I apply for that?" And he's like, "Well, I just got here. I haven't seen you do anything. We don't know each other." So there's some back and forth with that. They ended up letting me apply. I got the position, and then held that position for about 2.5 years and did what others perceived as a good job in that role, to the point where when the minor league coordinator role was open, they offered it to me and just said, "Hey, it's yours if you want it." And so the lesson in that whole story is like, yes, I went and put myself in a tough position financially a couple times, but it got me to where I ended up needing to go. And again, I didn't have the exact roadmap in mind, because in professional baseball, it's like, all right, get in, work your way up the levels, maybe coordinator role, maybe big league role after that. But I didn't do that. I went from basically a rookie ball strength coach to the minor league rehab strength and conditioning coordinator in the course of a couple weeks, just because I, again, took the leap of faith and just asked the question if I could even do it to the person who was in charge of making that decision. So I think there are times where, yeah, you're going to have to do that. Strength and conditioning, like if you hear Kier Wenham flat talk, he'll talk about how it's a race to the bottom, and it's people willing to accept the least amount of money for the most amount of work. And it's a very saturated field. So supply and demand 101, economics 101, that's going to drive the price down. You've got a very high demand, a very high supply and a relatively low demand. There's not a ton of these jobs, so it's going to drive the price down for what they have to pay you to do this. But over time, if you do a good enough job, and I think part of the lesson in here is like you have to provide value at every stop you're at beyond what your minimum requirement is. If you just show up and punch the clock and go home and you're relatively forgettable, you're not going to progress in the way that you want. So you have to drive value. You have to be looking to provide an impact, whether that's for the organization, for the athletes, or probably both, because if you impact one positively, it's usually going to impact everybody positively. And so it's got to come from a selfless place too, of like actually wanting to serve the athletes. It's not from like, oh, I just want to be a director one day, so I'm going to do everything that I need to do to be a director. No, it's like I'm trying to make our athletes better so that they have a better career, or like they learn something from me and become better people for it, because not all our guys are going to play professional baseball. And then when you do that and you provide real value to the organization and to the athletes that you're coaching, the doors will open themselves. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that was a perfect answer. That was very in-depth. And I was going to ask about why do you think jobs are being offered at such a low price? I saw a post recently about the Lakers strength and conditioning job, and it's like the average player is making $13 million, the average coach is making like $3 million, and then the strength and conditioning coach role was like $100K. But you kind of filled that answer in already with the supply and demand.
Yeah, there's that piece, and there's also it's hard to maybe quantify the value the strength and conditioning coach has. And so you could look at something like, oh, here's our injury rates. Yeah, well, that's super multifactorial, and you're going to get blamed when it goes wrong, and you're not going to get the praise when it happens well. And it might not be your fault one way or the other, and it might be, but nobody can like prove it, right? So there's very few objective ways to quantify a strength and conditioning coach. Did the athletes get stronger? Well, does that matter if the performance on the field wasn't good? Okay, did they get better on the field and no better in the gym? Well, that no one's going to give you credit for that. So it's very, very tough to prove your worth versus if I'm a salesperson, did I hit my quota? Did I sell X number of whatever I'm trying to sell and provide this much revenue for the company? Very hard to do for a strength and conditioning coach. I also feel like people just are like afraid to ask for more at times, and there's a wrong way to do it and a wrong time to do it, and there's a right way to do it and a right way and right time to do that. But those also are factors. It's not just the supply and demand. That's obviously like the market economics of the field drives a lot of that. But then some of the other things where it's like, well, how do I tell if I'm actually doing a good job other than like my friends like me, like the coaches that I'm boys with think I'm doing, they'll vouch for me, right? So I don't know. I think people know a quality performance coach when they see it, but then like having the tangible, like this is exactly what you made us better at, is not always real.
As far as like looking at your own like success, I guess, how do you go about kind of how do I want to ask this? Like looking at it in a tangible way of like, let's say an athlete gets injured. Obviously, that's not your fault, but is there a certain point where you feel like I should have done a better job? And if the team, doesn't win a whole bunch, it's obviously probably not your fault. But is there a point where you're like, oh, I should have also done a better job? Like, how do you look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, like, am I doing a good enough job when those metrics aren't necessarily dependent on how you're doing?
Um, so I try to, again, operate with a set of principles as like, these are what I believe currently as a strength and conditioning coach that are going to positively improve our performance and our health. These are the things that I believe in. Am I accomplishing these? Every single time a guy gets hurt, I go back and I sift through like, did I miss something? Every single time. Now, if it's minor, if a guy comes in, he's like, oh, my trap's cranky today. Like, okay, whatever. But like, guy goes and blows out an arm, or guy pulls a hamstring. I'm going through and saying like, what did we miss? What should have happened better? And I'm looking at my work. I'm looking at the work of the entire staff, and saying like, what went wrong? Did we do everything that we thought was correct and we got a bad outcome? Like I could put my head on the pillow and sleep at night. I think imposter syndrome is a very real thing in this field. I think if you don't feel it at some point, I think you need to check your ego, because it's very like, there's so many really, really good people that you can learn so much from in this industry. And like, you can always be learning from people and getting better at what you do, or changing the way you think positively. Not too much of an imposter syndrome can like be a bad thing. And I think the information and social media age can like feed into that at times. But that kind of like keeps a fire lit under me of like, I look around and I feel like I'm not like, there are things that I believe I do really, really well. There are things that I see somebody doing. I'm like, man, that's really, really cool. That's really good stuff. I wish I understood it like them. And then I have to kind of remind myself like, hey, you got to wear a lot of hats. So try and do a lot of things really well. But just like understand that there's probably going to be some folks at times that are better than you, and that's okay. But that like little bit is it's kind of insidious. It's always kind of there in the background, but it keeps a fire lit. So that's another one where I kind of went on a tangent. But regarding like the performance of the team and the health of the athletes, I'm always reviewing that retroactively to see what went well, what didn't go well, how do we get better? Because that's the only way I know.
I don't have any further questions just because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to respect your time. But Rowan, if you want to, I think we have one final question.
Yeah. So we like to end things off with another kind of fun, open-ended question here. We call it the AAA, what's powering you? It's just about your life, what's going on in your life that's keeping you going right now. Whether that's like a new training program, some new music you discovered, maybe a new food that you've been enjoying. What's kind of keeping you going and powering you?
With training, like nothing specific. Like I don't follow a specific training program. People like our players will be like, well, why don't you do this? And I'm like, because I don't have the same goals as you, man. Like I just my goals are to feel good and to stay athletic as long as I can. And for me right now, in the summer when we've got a little bit more time off, I'm playing a little bit more golf. Like I love playing golf. And so when I was in Florida with the Astros, in the golf capital of the world, it was awesome because you could just throw a stone and hit a good like land on a beautiful golf course. But like trying to stay as sharp with that is really fun, because it's one of those sports where like I would call myself a decently good golfer, but it is just so hard. Like the perfection just doesn't exist, and so I love that chase of it. So I've gotten to do a little bit of more of that now that we're past the postseason. So that's been good. But like my training is like I want to stay athletic as long as I can, and so like some days I'll lift heavy, some days I'll sprint, some days I'll go for a 6 mile run. I just want to be able to do whatever. Like if anybody were to ask me to do some sort of within reason athletic feat at any given time, I want to be like, yeah, let's do it. So that's kind of I don't know, the training side. Everything's a playground for me. Some days I like go in and do cartwheels and roll around on the ground and then try and hit a heavy deadlift, or I will try and like do heavy. I'll do a heavy lifting session to like a super acoustic soft playlist that's just kind of like the antithesis of what was going on in there. And sometimes I'll like throw on like some crazy hard rock emo stuff and just let it rip. I don't know. It's fun. I just like training's fun to me. I don't follow anything super specific at the moment, but I enjoy like the freedom that it allows. Like you can literally do whatever you want. You don't have to do any certain thing. And as a almost 30-year-old gen pop person, like that's what I am. I'm not an athlete. I just want to stay as athletic as possible. So, oh, you guys want to go play beach volleyball? Cool, let's do it. You guys want to go? Someone says, hey, I'm going for a 10-mile run today. You want to come? Sure, I'm in. Let's go. I don't know. Keep it fresh. Always changing.
That's a fantastic answer, and a fantastic answer that adds to a bunch of other fantastic answers from this episode. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. That was a really fun discussion for me. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure Anthony will say the same thing, but it was great getting to know you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Had a blast. Hope you enjoy the waning hours of your weekend here.
You as well.